We are requesting community benefit condemnation of the property at 1847 Ranch Road, Canyon Lake, Texas,
for the construction of the Lakeshore Community Event Center. That's the official petition. That's what the HOA filed with Comal County to seize my 45-acre ranch. A ranch my father bought with cash in 1978, built a workshop on with his own hands, and never owed a dollar on. The Community Event Center was a 12,000 square foot wedding venue for the HOA president's daughter. The offer was $180,000 for property worth over $1 million. Her husband was the county commissioner who voted to approve it, while secretly owning 40% of the venue's LLC. They thought a boat builder wouldn't read the fine print. So I read their entire bylaws, and what I found gave me the keys to their whole HOA. Stay with me. My name is Sawyer Jennings, and I build boats by hand on the north shore of Canyon Lake in Comal County, Texas. Wooden fishing skiffs, cedar strip canoes, custom pontoons with hand-laid teak decks. I've been doing it for 18 years in a workshop my father built from limestone blocks he pulled out of the hillside in 1979. The shop sits 40 feet from the water line, and when the wind comes off the lake in the morning, it carries the smell of juniper and wet limestone through the open bay doors and mixes with the sawdust and marine varnish until the whole place smells like something between a forest and a furniture store. My father, Clayton Jennings, everyone called him Clay, bought this ranch in 1978, 45 acres of Texas hill country rolling down to 800 feet of Canyon Lake shoreline. The land came with a natural limestone bluff that drops 30 feet straight to the water, a private boat ramp he poured himself, and the only deep-water cove on the north shore that stays calm when the south wind kicks up whitecaps everywhere else. Clay was a pipe fitter for 32 years, worked refineries along the Gulf Coast. He bought this land with cash he saved one overtime check at a time, and he never owed a dollar on it. Clay taught me everything. How to read the grain in white oak before you put a saw to it, how to steam bend cedar ribs without cracking them. He used to say that wood doesn't lie. If the joint's tight, the boat floats. If the joint's sloppy, the boat sinks. 3 years ago, Clay started forgetting things. Small things first, where he put his truck keys, whether he'd eaten lunch. Then bigger things. He called me by my brother's name, and I don't have a brother. He walked down to the dock one night in January, wearing nothing but his undershirt, looking for a boat that had been sold in 2014. The diagnosis was early-stage Alzheimer's. He's in a memory care facility in New Braunfels now. A good one, clean, with staff who treat him like a person instead of a patient. It costs $9,000 a month. The boat business covers it, but just barely. My daughter Lily is 12. She's been with me full-time since she was 3, when her mother moved to Houston and decided motherhood was optional. Lily does her homework at a workbench in the shop, hands me clamps when I'm gluing hull planks, and can identify 12 species of Texas hardwood by smell alone. She's the best thing I've ever built. She just showed up and made everything make sense. The trouble arrived in 2021, when a developer named Clint Holloway built Lakeshore Heights on 120 acres east of my property. 180 homes, a clubhouse, and an HOA run by his wife, Brenda Holloway. Heavy set, blonde hair always blown out like she was headed to a television interview. White Range Rover with custom plates that said LKSHORE. She carried a leather portfolio with the HOA logo embossed in gold, and spoke to everyone like she was doing them a favor by acknowledging they existed. First time Brenda came to my ranch, she stood at the edge of my workshop and wrinkled her nose at the smell of marine epoxy. She told me the HOA was concerned about the visual and environmental impact of my boat building operation on the lake community. She said wood shavings were blowing into the subdivision, that the smell of varnish was incompatible with residential living, and that I needed to either enclose my workshop entirely or relocate it away from the shoreline. I was midway through planking a 22-foot fishing skiff for a guide service out of San Marcos. I looked up from the hull, pushed my safety glasses onto my forehead, and said, "Mrs. Holloway, this workshop has been here since 1979. Your subdivision has been here since last Tuesday. I'm not moving a single clamp." She smiled like I'd said something cute. We'll revisit this conversation, Mr. Jennings." Then she turned and walked back to the Range Rover, her heels punching little holes in the gravel.
Brenda didn't revisit the conversation.
She escalated it. 6 weeks after that first visit, I received a certified letter from the Lakeshore Heights HOA, sent to my address by registered mail with a return receipt. The letter informed me that the HOA board had unanimously voted to petition Comal County for a community benefit condemnation of my property. The stated purpose was the construction of the Lakeshore Community Event Center, a 12,000 square foot wedding and event venue with a limestone terrace overlooking the bluff, a catering kitchen, a bridal suite, and parking for 200 vehicles. The letter included an offer of fair compensation, $180,000 for 45 acres of waterfront property with a workshop, a private dock, a boat ramp, and 800 feet of canyon lake shoreline. My property had been appraised 2 years earlier at $1.2 million. They were offering me 15 cents on the dollar. I called a property attorney in San Antonio named Rosa Gutierrez. She was sharp, direct, and she didn't bother with small talk. When I read her the letter over the phone, she was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Jennings, a homeowners association in Texas does not have eminent domain authority. Only government entities, cities, counties, the state, and certain utility districts can condemn private property. An HOA is a private corporation. They have exactly as much legal authority to seize your land as your neighbor's book club." I asked her why they'd file the petition if they didn't have the authority. "Because they're counting on you not knowing that," she said. "And because someone on the county commission is going to try to make it look legitimate." That someone was Clint Holloway. 2 weeks after the HOA letter arrived, I received a second notice, this one from the Comal County Commissioner's Court. It stated that a petition for community benefit condemnation had been received and that a public hearing would be scheduled within 60 days to evaluate the request. The notice was signed by 3 of the 5 commissioners. One of them was Clint Holloway. Here's what most people don't know about condemnation in Texas. Under the Texas Property Code, only entities with statutory eminent domain authority can condemn private property. An HOA is not one of them. But a county commissioner's court can refer a condemnation petition to a special master if it determines the project serves a public benefit. The trick is defining what counts as a public benefit. A highway? Yes. A school? Yes. A wedding venue for the HOA president's daughter? Not even close. But Clint was counting on the process itself to do the work. Here's something most property owners don't realize. A condemnation notice, even a legally baseless one, creates real damage. It clouds your title. It scares off buyers. It makes banks nervous about lending against the property. Insurance companies start asking questions. Appraisers hedge their numbers. The letter itself was a weapon, even if the law behind it was empty. And Clint knew that most people would fold before they ever figured out the gun wasn't loaded. Rosa told me to sit tight and let her work. She filed a formal objection with the county clerk and requested a copy of the full condemnation petition, including all supporting documents and the commissioner's vote record. She also filed a public records request for Clint Holloway's financial disclosure statements. "If he's pushing this petition while his wife stands to profit from the project," Rosa said, "that's a conflict of interest under Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 171. He's required to recuse himself from any vote that benefits his spouse's financial interests. If he didn't, every action he took on this petition is voidable." I hung up and walked down to the dock. The metal cleats were hot from the sun, and the treated wood smelled like creosote and warm cedar. The lake was flat and green in the late afternoon light, and the limestone bluff threw a shadow across the water that looked like a staircase leading nowhere. A bass broke the surface 20 yards out, and the ripple spread in a perfect circle, then faded like it had never happened. A great blue heron stood on the boat ramp, one leg folded, watching me with the patience of something that has never been in a hurry. I thought about Clay, building that ramp in 1982, mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow and pouring it in sections over 3 weekends. I thought about Lily, doing her math homework on the workbench, while I sanded a hull plank to the thickness of a playing card. And I thought about Brenda Holloway, offering me 15 cents on the dollar for everything that mattered. The road was the next weapon. Lakeshore Heights had one main entrance, a 2-lane road called Ridgeview Drive that connected to Farm to Market Road 306. My ranch sat at the end of a gravel spur that branched off Ridgeview Drive, about a quarter-mile past the subdivision gate. I'd been using that spur since before the subdivision existed. It was originally a county maintenance road that Clay had improved with caliche and gravel in the 1980s. 2 weeks after the condemnation notice, Brenda had a chain-link gate installed across the spur road where it intersected Ridgeview Drive. She bolted a sign to the gate, Lakeshore Heights HOA, private road, authorized residents only. My ranch was on the other side. I drove to the gate on a Monday morning with a 22-foot cedar strip canoe on my trailer, headed to deliver it to a client in Wimberley. The gate was locked. A padlock the size of my fist, brand new, with a combination I didn't have. I sat in my truck for a full minute, looking at that lock, feeling the blood pressure in my temples. I called Rosa. She said to document everything and not to cut the lock. Yet. If that road was a county maintenance road before the subdivision was built, there may be a prescriptive easement or a recorded right-of-way. Let me pull the county records. In the meantime, I had a canoe to deliver and no way to get it past a gate I wasn't authorized to open. I called my client, explained the situation, and lost the delivery window. He was understanding, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. A boat builder who can't get his boats out of his own workshop doesn't inspire confidence. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes after hanging up, staring at that padlock, listening to the cedar canoe creak on the trailer behind me. The varnish was still curing. The hull smelled like linseed oil and fresh-cut wood. I'd spent 3 months on that boat. 3 months of hand-planing each strip to the thickness of a nickel, fitting them edge to edge, fiberglassing the inside, sanding the outside until it was smooth enough to reflect the sky. And now it was sitting in a gravel turnout behind a chain-link gate because a woman who'd lived here for 2 years decided my road was her road. I drove the canoe back to the shop and put a tarp over it. Lily was sitting on the dock when I walked down. She looked at the trailer and said, "Couldn't get through?" I shook my head. She went back to reading her book. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. 12 years old, and she already understood what it felt like to be fenced out of your own life. Over the next 3 weeks, Brenda's gate cost me 3 contracts. A custom pontoon for a fishing lodge on Medina Lake, $42,000. A restoration job on a 1960s wooden runabout, $18,000. And a repeat client who wanted a matching pair of cedar kayaks, $6,000. $66,000 in lost business because a woman with a Range Rover and a padlock decided my livelihood was less important than her daughter's wedding venue. Rosa found what she was looking for. The spur road was originally built by Comal County in 1971 as access to a water pumping station that was decommissioned in 1994. The county never formally abandoned the road. It remained on the county's road inventory, which meant it was technically a public right-of-way. Brenda had no legal authority to gate it. Rosa filed a complaint with the county road department. An engineer drove out, inspected the road, confirmed its status, and issued a written order to the HOA to remove the gate within 72 hours. Brenda ignored the order. The county sent a crew with bolt cutters. They cut the lock, removed the gate, and posted a notice that the road was a public right-of-way and could not be obstructed. Brenda had the gate reinstalled 2 days later. The county cut it again. This time, they cited the HOA, $5,000 for obstruction of a public roadway. Brenda paid the fine and had the gate installed a 3rd time. Rosa called me that evening. "She's not rational about this, Sawyer. She's spending HOA money to fight a battle she can't win on a road she doesn't own. That tells me something. This isn't about a wedding venue. This is personal." She was right. But I didn't know how personal until the next week. I went back to the workshop that night and ran my hand along the cedar canoe I still hadn't been able to deliver. The wood was cool and smooth under my fingers. 3 months of work, sitting under a tarp, losing value by the day. I thought about calling Clay, but he wouldn't have understood. Some nights are like that. You just stand in the shop and listen to the lake. The safety complaint landed on a Tuesday. Brenda filed a formal complaint with the Comal County Fire Marshal's office, claiming my boat-building workshop was storing hazardous quantities of flammable chemicals within 200 feet of a residential water source. She attached photographs, taken from the road, through my open workshop doors, showing cans of marine varnish, bottles of acetone, and a 5-gallon drum of epoxy resin on my supply shelf. The fire marshal sent an inspector the next morning, a man named Dale Hutchins, who'd been inspecting workshops and warehouses in Comal County for 20 years. He walked through my shop with a clipboard, checked my fire extinguishers, checked my ventilation, checked my chemical storage cabinet, and checked the distance from my supply shelf to the nearest structure. "Mr. Jennings, you're in full compliance," he said. "Your quantities are well below the threshold for hazardous material classification. Your ventilation exceeds code, and your chemical storage cabinet is the exact model I recommend to every woodworking shop I inspect." He looked out the open bay door toward Lakeshore Heights. "For the record, I tested the soil and groundwater at your property line. Clean. No contamination. Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't understand chemistry or doesn't care." He paused, then added, "Also, there are 6 homes in that subdivision with more pool chemicals in their garages than you have in your entire shop. Nobody's filing complaints about those." The complaint was dismissed. Dale shook my hand on the way out and said, "Between you and me, I've inspected shops with 10 times your chemical load that never get a single complaint. This one smells political." He wasn't wrong. The smell of marine varnish had been drifting off this property since 1979. Nobody complained for 43 years. Then Brenda Holloway moved in, and suddenly my shop was a hazmat site. But the inspection report went into the county record, and Brenda used it. She sent a letter to every homeowner in Lakeshore Heights, claiming that my workshop had been inspected for hazardous materials, and that chemical storage concerns remain under review. She didn't mention the part where I passed with full compliance. She didn't mention the part where the inspector found nothing. She just let the words hazardous materials and under review do the work. 14 homeowners signed a petition supporting the condemnation. Brenda presented it to the county commission as evidence of community concern. Clint accepted it into the record without disclosing that his wife had drafted it. Then came the zoning play. Brenda hired a land use attorney out of Austin to petition the county for a zoning overlay that would reclassify my property from agricultural/commercial to residential only. If it passed, my boat building operation would become a non-conforming use. I'd have to apply for a variance every year just to keep my workshop open, and variances can be denied. The petition went to the County Planning Commission. I attended the hearing. Brenda stood at the podium with her land use attorney and presented a 12-page brief arguing that my workshop was inconsistent with the character of the surrounding residential community. She had noise measurements. She had odor complaints. She had photographs of sawdust on the road. I stood up during public comment. I didn't have a 12-page brief. I had a photograph of my father pouring the workshop foundation in 1979 and a tax receipt showing 43 years of continuous commercial operation on the same parcel. My family's been building boats on this lake since before most of these houses had foundations, I said. If the character of this community includes a man who builds things with his hands, then my workshop is the most consistent thing here. Commissioner Ellen Voss, a 5th-generation hill country rancher, looked at Brenda's attorney and said, "Counselor, are you seriously asking this commission to reclassify a 43-year-old business to accommodate a 2-year-old subdivision?" The petition was denied unanimously. Commissioner Voss gavelled it closed before Brenda's attorney could even request a continuance. Brenda gathered her papers and walked out. Her heels hit the tile floor of the hearing room like a countdown clock. At the door, she turned and looked at me. Her eyes were flat and cold, like lake water in January. "This isn't over, Mr. Jennings." I believed her. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 2 weeks reading something she never expected me to open. The Lakeshore Heights HOA bylaws, all 47 pages. And what I found in those pages was about to change everything. Rosa had told me early on to request the HOA's financial records. Under Texas Property Code Section 209.005, every homeowner in a property owners association has the right to inspect the association's books and records. You don't need a reason, you don't need permission, you just need to submit a written request, and the HOA has 10 business days to comply. I wasn't a Lakeshore Heights homeowner, but Rosa found a workaround. Craig Kellner, a retired postal worker who lived on the east side of the subdivision and had attended every HOA meeting for 3 years, submitted the request on my behalf. Craig was 64, quiet and methodical. He'd been keeping his own notes on HOA expenditures since he moved in, and the numbers had never added up. The records arrived in a banker's box. 3 years of financial statements, invoices, receipts, and bank records. Rosa and I spread them across my workshop table, next to a half-finished kayak and a pot of cold coffee. It took 2 days to map the pattern. Brenda had been funneling HOA funds to her daughter's wedding, $127,000 over 18 months. The invoices were disguised as community event planning expenses, but the vendors were a wedding planner in Bernie, a florist in Fredericksburg who specialized in bridal arrangements, a caterer whose website featured nothing but wedding menus, and a linen rental company whose invoice specified ivory chair sashes, 240 count, for Holloway Prescott reception. She hadn't even bothered to remove her daughter's name. But the financial fraud was only the first layer. Rosa pulled Clint Holloway's financial disclosure statements from the county clerk's office. Texas Local Government Code Chapter 171 requires elected officials to disclose any financial interest in matters that come before their governing body. Clint had filed no such disclosure regarding the condemnation petition, but a search of the Texas Secretary of State's business filings showed that Clint was listed as a 40% owner of an LLC called Canyon Vista Events, registered 6 weeks before the HOA voted to petition for condemnation. The LLC's stated business purpose was event venue management and hospitality services. Clint Holloway had voted to condemn my property to build a wedding venue, in which he was a 40% owner. He'd done it without disclosing his financial interest. Under Texas law, that didn't just void his vote, it was a criminal offense. Texas Local Government Code Section 171.003 makes it a Class A misdemeanor for an elected official to participate in a vote on a matter in which they have a substantial financial interest without filing the required affidavit of disclosure. And there was one more thing. Rosa looked at the condemnation petition itself, the legal basis for the entire seizure attempt. She read it twice, then set it down and said, "Sawyer, this petition is legally void on its face. An HOA in Texas has zero eminent domain authority. None. They can't condemn a parking space, let alone a 45-acre ranch. The county commission should never have accepted this petition for review." The only reason it got this far is because Clint Holloway shepherded it through the process from the inside. 3 separate frauds. The embezzlement, $127,000 of homeowner money routed to wedding vendors. The conflict of interest, a county commissioner voting on a matter that enriched his own LLC, and a condemnation petition that had no legal basis from day one, shepherded through by the man who stood to profit. All of it held together by one woman's entitlement and one man's willingness to abuse his office. The sawdust on the table had mixed with the coffee rings, and the late afternoon light turned the whole mess golden. The fraud, on the other hand, was ugly as sin. I spent the next 3 weeks building my case the same way I build a boat, one plank at a time. Each one fitted tight against the last, no gaps. First move, the bylaws. I read the Lakeshore Heights HOA governing documents cover to cover, 47 pages of articles of incorporation, bylaws, and amendments. Most of it was boilerplate, but buried in Article 12, Section 4, I found the clause that changed everything. A special meeting of the membership may be called upon written petition of not less than 25% of property owners in good standing. The purpose of such meeting may include the recall of any or all board members by majority vote of those present or represented by proxy. 25% of 180 homeowners was 45 signatures. I needed 45 people willing to sign a petition calling for a special election to recall the entire board. Second move, the canvas. I started knocking on doors, not as a salesman, not as an agitator, as a neighbor with documents. I carried a folder with 3 things: the wedding vendor invoices, Clint's LLC filing, and the relevant sections of the Texas Property Code. I let people read for themselves. The first door I knocked on was Craig Kellner's. He'd already seen the financial records. He signed immediately and offered to come with me. We went together after that, 2 men walking a subdivision in the Texas heat, ringing doorbells, showing paperwork. Some people listened, some people shut the door. But the numbers kept growing. Here's what I learned about HOA politics. Most people don't go to meetings. Most people don't read bylaws. Most people pay their dues and hope for the best. But when you show a homeowner a receipt proving their quarterly assessment paid for the HOA president's daughter's wedding florist, something changes in their eyes. It's not anger exactly. It's the look of a person who just realized they've been treated like a fool, and nobody likes that feeling. By the end of the second week, we had 71 signatures. By the end of the third week, 94. More than 50% of all homeowners, double what the bylaws required. Third move, the press. I called the investigative desk at KSAT in San Antonio and spoke with a reporter named James Okafor, who covered public corruption in the Hill Country counties. I gave him the outline: a county commissioner who voted to condemn a private ranch to build a wedding venue he secretly owned 40% of, funded by an HOA president who embezzled $127,000 from her own homeowners to pay for her daughter's wedding. James asked for documentation. I sent him the LLC filing, the financial records, the vendor invoices, and the condemnation petition. He called back the next morning. This is going to be a lead story. When's the election? Fourth move, the legal foundation. Rosa prepared 3 documents: a formal petition for a special meeting under Article 12, Section 4, a complaint to the Texas Attorney General's office regarding Brenda's fiduciary violations under the Texas Property Code, and an ethics complaint to the Texas Ethics Commission regarding Clint's failure to disclose his financial interest. Here's a practical takeaway for anyone watching who lives in an HOA. Your governing documents are public. You have a legal right to see them. And buried in almost every set of HOA bylaws is a mechanism to recall the board. The threshold varies. Some require 25%, some require a third, but it's almost always there. The board doesn't want you to know about it. They don't mention it at meetings. They don't highlight it in the welcome packet. But it's there. And if your board is stealing from you, lying to you, or abusing their authority, that recall clause is the most powerful tool you have. The special meeting was scheduled for September 12th. I had the signatures. I had the evidence. I had the press. And I had 94 homeowners who were tired of paying for someone else's wedding. Fifth move. I visited Clay on a Sunday afternoon. He was sitting in the day room at the memory care facility, watching birds through the window. Some days he knows me, some days he doesn't. That day, he looked at me and said, "How's the lake?" "Still there, Pa," I said. "Still there." He nodded, like that was all he needed to hear. I sat with him for an hour. I didn't tell him about the condemnation or the HOA or any of it. He'd built that ranch with his hands. He didn't need to know someone was trying to take it apart with a briefcase. I just sat with him and watched the birds. Brenda found out about the petition on a Friday. I know because her attorney, a Houston litigator named Victor Pratt she'd hired after firing the HOA's original counsel, called Rosa and threatened to seek an injunction blocking the special meeting. "On what grounds?" Rosa asked. "Procedural deficiencies in the petition," Pratt said. Rosa laughed, actually laughed. "Victor, the petition complies with Article 12, Section 4, to the letter. Every signature is from a property owner in good standing. Every signer's dues are current. The petition was delivered to the board secretary by certified mail with return receipt. If you file for an injunction, I will ask the court for sanctions, and I will get them." Pratt didn't file the injunction. Instead, Brenda tried something else. She called an emergency board meeting, just the 5 board members, no homeowners present, and passed an amendment to Article 12 that raised the petition threshold from 25% to 60%. She had the amendment printed, distributed to homeowners, and claimed it was effective immediately. Rosa was ready for this. Under Texas law, HOA bylaw amendments require a vote of the membership, not just the board. A board can propose amendments, but only the homeowners can ratify them. Here's a takeaway worth remembering. If your HOA board ever tries to change the rules without a member vote, that change is void. Brenda's emergency amendment was about as legally binding as a suggestion scribbled on a napkin, and Rosa had the case law to prove it. Rosa sent a letter to every homeowner explaining that the amendment was invalid and that the special meeting would proceed as scheduled. She cited the specific sections of the Texas Business Organizations Code that governed the amendment process. Brenda responded by posting on the Lakeshore Heights Facebook group that Rosa was an outside agitator and that the special meeting was an illegal attempt to overthrow the legitimate leadership of the community. 63 people liked the post, but 94 had already signed the petition. The math wasn't on Brenda's side. Then Brenda went personal. She contacted 3 of my boat-building clients, people who had placed deposits on custom orders, and told them my workshop was under investigation for environmental violations, and that I was facing potential eviction from the property. 2 clients called me concerned. One asked for his deposit back. I returned it without argument, but it cost me an $8,000 job and a client relationship I built over 4 years. Brenda also started showing up at the ranch. Not on the property, she was careful about that, but on the public road just outside my gate. She'd park the Range Rover and sit there, sometimes for an hour, watching my workshop through the windshield. Lily noticed first. She came into the shop one afternoon, sawdust in her hair, and said, "Dad, that lady is sitting out there again. She's just staring." I told Lily to stay in the shop. I wiped the varnish off my hands with a shop rag that smelled like turpentine and walked to the gate. The sun was behind the Range Rover, and the light bouncing off the white paint was so bright I had to squint. I could see Brenda's silhouette behind the windshield, the shape of a woman who'd spent 3 years building a kingdom out of other people's money and couldn't stand the idea that someone might not bow down. I stopped at the gate. Brenda rolled down her window. She was wearing sunglasses, but I could see her jaw working like she was chewing on words she hadn't decided to say yet. Her fingernails were painted white, and they tapped the steering wheel in a rhythm that had nothing to do with music. "You think you're going to waltz into my HOA and take it from me?" she said. "I built that community. I raised the property values. I made those people's homes worth something. And now some boat builder with sawdust in his hair thinks he can run it better?" "I don't want to run your HOA, Brenda," I said. "I want to stop you from stealing my ranch. The HOA is just the tool you're using to do it." She stared at me for a long moment. The afternoon sun reflected off the Range Rover's hood and threw a bright bar of light across her face. Then she said, "You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I think I do," I said. "It's all in the financial records." She rolled up the window and drove away. The gravel popped under her tires like small caliber rounds. Brenda went after Lily on a Wednesday. Lily rode the school bus to Canyon Lake Middle School every morning. The bus stop was at the intersection of Ridgeview Drive and Farm to Market 306, about a quarter-mile from our gate. That Wednesday, Brenda was parked at the bus stop when Lily got off the bus in the afternoon. Brenda stepped out of the Range Rover and approached her. "Lily, honey, I need to talk to you about your daddy's situation." Her voice was sweet, practiced, the kind of sweet that has teeth behind it. "He's making some very bad decisions, and I'm worried about you. What's going to happen to you if he loses the ranch?" Lily is 12. She's been raised by a single father in a boat shop on a lake. She's not a delicate kid. She looked at Brenda and said, "My dad builds boats that don't sink. I think he'll be fine." Then she walked past her and up the road toward home. She told me about it while I was finishing a coat of spar varnish on a canoe paddle. Her voice was steady, but she was gripping the edge of the workbench hard enough to leave marks in the soft pine. "She scared me a little, Dad. Not what she said, how she said it, like she was rehearsing." I put down the brush. The varnish smell was thick in the air, warm, sweet, like honey mixed with turpentine. I looked at my daughter, standing in the golden late afternoon light that came through the workshop doors, sawdust on her shoes, and I felt something go cold and hard in my chest. The kind of cold that doesn't fade with time, the kind that stays. I called Rosa. She filed for a protective order within the hour. The judge granted it the next morning. Brenda Holloway was ordered to maintain a distance of 300 feet from Lily, her school, and our property. Violation meant arrest. Brenda's response was predictable. She went to Facebook. She posted that I was using my child as a weapon in a property dispute, and that the protective order was a political stunt coordinated with outside legal interests. She tagged it, "Protect Lakeshore Heights," and pinned it. Her supporters rallied in the comments. But something had shifted. Other homeowners, the ones who'd signed the petition and some who hadn't, started pushing back in the comments. One woman wrote, "Brenda, you approached a 12-year-old at a bus stop. What exactly are we protecting?" That comment got more likes than Brenda's original post. James Okafor at KSAT had been monitoring the Facebook group. He screenshotted everything: the original post, the comments, the bus stop confrontation that Brenda had unwittingly confirmed by referencing it in her own words. He called me that evening. "Sawyer, the story is getting bigger. I'm going to lead with the bus stop incident. It puts a face on the abuse of power." The special meeting was 6 days away. Brenda knew it. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her custom heels. 94 signatures, the financial evidence, the press, a protective order, and a community that was starting to see through the pearl necklace and the leather portfolio to the woman underneath, someone who'd rather intimidate a child at a bus stop than admit she'd lost control of a situation she never should have started. 3 days before the meeting, Craig Kellner knocked on my door with a printout. He'd been cross-referencing the HOA's vendor payments with the Texas Secretary of State's business registry. 2 of the vendors Brenda had paid from HOA funds, the event planner and the caterer, were registered to the same address. That address was a commercial suite in Bernie, leased by Canyon Vista Events, LLC, the company Clint owned 40% of. Brenda hadn't just been embezzling HOA money for her daughter's wedding. She'd been funneling it through vendors connected to Clint's company. The money went out of the HOA, through the vendors, and back into an LLC her husband controlled. It wasn't just theft. It was money laundering through a homeowners association. Craig sat at my kitchen table, still holding the printout, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His hands were steady, but his voice wasn't. "I've been an HOA member for 3 years. I've paid my dues every quarter. And my money paid for this woman's daughter's wedding through her husband's shell company." He set the printout down on the table and shook his head slowly. "I want my money back. And I want her gone." September 12th, Lakeshore Heights Clubhouse, 7 p.m. The parking lot was full by 6:30. The clubhouse meeting room held 120. Chairs had been added, and people were standing against the walls and spilling into the hallway. 140 homeowners were present or represented by proxy, out of 180. I'd never seen that kind of turnout for a neighborhood meeting, and neither had anyone else. Brenda sat at the board table with the 4 other board members. Victor Pratt sat beside her. Clint sat in the front row in a navy blazer with his county commissioner's pin on the lapel, arms crossed. James Okafor from KSAT was in the back with a cameraman. The room smelled like institutional carpet and nervous sweat. I sat in the second row with Rosa and Craig. Lily was at home with my neighbor's wife. Brenda opened the meeting and tried to control the agenda, starting with old business and a treasurer's report that glossed over the irregularities. She spoke for 12 minutes. The room was restless. When Brenda finished, Craig stood up with the petition. "Madam President, under Article 12, Section 4, this petition calls for a recall vote on all 5 board members, 94 signatures, certified. I move that we proceed." Brenda's jaw tightened. "The board has determined that the petition contains procedural irregularities." "Name one," Rosa said from her seat. Brenda looked at Victor Pratt. Pratt looked at his legal pad. Neither spoke. "The petition is valid," Rosa continued. "Every signature is from an owner in good standing. Any attempt to block this vote violates your own governing documents." A homeowner named Tom Saylor stood up. "I'd like to hear the evidence before we vote." Rosa walked to the front and projected documents onto the screen. She showed the vendor invoices. $127,000 paid to wedding vendors from HOA funds. The linen company invoice with Holloway Prescott Reception printed right on it. The florist's bridal order. The caterer's wedding menu pricing sheet. She showed Clint's LLC filing. Canyon Vista Events, 40% ownership, registered 6 weeks before the condemnation vote. She showed the vendor address match. 2 HOA vendors registered to the same commercial suite as Clint's LLC. Homeowner money flowing through Brenda's approved vendors into an entity her husband controlled. She showed Clint's missing financial disclosure. No affidavit, no recusal. A commissioner voting to seize private property to benefit a company he owned 40% of. The room was dead silent. Someone in the back said, "Jesus Christ." Nobody shushed them. Brenda stood up. These documents have been taken out of context. The community event fund was approved by the board for your daughter's wedding, Brenda. Craig's voice was steady. The invoices have her name on them. You used our money to pay for your daughter's reception. And your husband used his office to try to steal a man's ranch so you could build the venue. Clint stood up from the front row. His face was the color of raw hamburger. I'm not going to sit here and... Commissioner Holloway, Rosa said, you're welcome to leave. But for the record, an ethics complaint has been filed with the Texas Ethics Commission, and the Comal County Attorney's Office has been notified of a potential violation of Texas Local Government Code Section 171.003. You may want to consult your own attorney before making any further public statements. Clint sat back down. He didn't say another word for the rest of the meeting. Commissioner Graves, Tom Saylor, called for the recall vote. The motion was seconded by a woman in the fourth row before the words were fully out of his mouth. The vote? 131 in favor of recalling the entire board. 9 opposed. The board was dissolved. Then came the vote for the interim board. Craig Kellner as interim treasurer. Tom Saylor as interim secretary, and Sawyer Jennings, the boat builder from the ranch next door, as interim president. 128 in favor, 12 opposed. I stood up. The room was quiet. Brenda was still sitting at the board table, hands flat on the surface, staring at the wood like it might open up and swallow her. Meeting adjourned, I said. It was the only thing I needed to say. Brenda stood up slowly. She picked up her leather portfolio and walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned and looked at me, not with anger, but with disbelief, like a woman who'd spent her whole life building walls and had just watched someone walk through them. Madison was sitting in the last row. She hadn't moved during the entire meeting. She was crying, not for her mother, for the wedding that was supposed to fix everything, and instead broke it all open. James Okafor's story aired the next morning. The headline, HOA. President embezzled $127,000 for daughter's wedding, while husband voted to seize neighbor's ranch. The fallout was swift and thorough. Clint Holloway resigned from the Comal County Commissioner's Court 9 days after the meeting. The Texas Ethics Commission opened a formal inquiry. Canyon Vista Events, LLC, was dissolved. The condemnation petition was withdrawn. Without Clint's vote, the remaining commissioners rejected it 3-1, as lacking statutory authority. Brenda was charged with misapplication of fiduciary property, a third-degree felony under Texas Penal Code Section 32.45. Her attorney negotiated a plea, full restitution, 2 years of probation, and a permanent bar from serving on any HOA board in Texas. I served as interim HOA president for 6 months. I didn't want the job. I wanted to build boats. But someone had to clean up the mess, and the homeowners asked me to stay until the new bylaws were in place. I accepted on one condition, that I could resign the moment the permanent board was elected. During those 6 months, I rewrote the bylaws with Rosa's help. Mandatory annual financial audits by an independent CPA, term limits for board members, 2 years, maximum 2 terms. A requirement that any expenditure over $5,000 be approved by a majority vote of the membership. A prohibition on board members or their spouses contracting with the HOA, and a clause requiring full financial disclosure from any board member with a relationship to a county official. Craig Kellner was elected permanent treasurer. He runs the books like the retired postal worker he is, methodical, precise, and transparent. Every homeowner gets a quarterly financial statement that's actually accurate. The $127,000 was returned to the HOA and distributed as credits against the next year's assessments. 180 families got $706 each. Some of them framed the credit notice. I used the publicity from the case to launch the Canyon Lake Youth Boat Building Program. Every Saturday morning, 8 kids between the ages of 12 and 17 come to my workshop and learn to build boats. We start with basic joinery, mortise and tenon, dovetails, scarfing. By the end of the summer, each kid builds their own paddle. By the end of the year, they build a boat together. The first boat was a 12-foot flat-bottom skiff. They named it the Recall. Lily teaches the younger kids how to read wood grain. James Okafor did a follow-up story on the program. The segment ended with a shot of 8 kids sanding a hole on the shore of Canyon Lake, the limestone bluff behind them, the water flat and green in the morning light. One of the kids looked at the camera and said, "I never built anything before. Now I built a boat." The segment got 400,000 views. I visited Clay on a Sunday after the program launched. I brought him a photograph, the kids standing around the finished skiff, all of them grinning, sawdust in their hair. He held the picture with both hands and studied it for a long time. Then he looked up at me and said, "That's the workshop." "Yeah, Pa, that's the workshop." He nodded slowly. "Good place to build things." I drove back to the ranch with the windows down. The hill country air smelled like cedar and warm limestone, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers blooming along the roadside. The lake was visible from the top of the ridge, a sheet of green glass set into brown hills. My workshop was down there, my dock, my daughter, and 45 acres of Texas dirt that nobody was ever going to take from me again. Brenda Holloway has to drive past my ranch every time she leaves Lakeshore Heights. She has to see the sign I put up at the gate, Jennings Boat Works, established 1979. She has to see the kids carrying lumber down to the workshop on Saturday mornings, and she has to know that the man she tried to run off his own land now holds the position she built her entire identity around.
You know what got Brenda and Clint in the end? Not the high-power attorney. A board builder who read 47 pages of HOA bylaws. Sawyer's real advantage was patience and documentation. He pulled the financial records, filed the LLC filing, and walked door to door with the paperwork. If you live in an HOA, here's the lesson. You have a legal right to request financial records. Somewhere in your bylaws, there is almost certainly a recall clause. The board won't advertise it, but it's there. And if they're abusing their authorities, that clause is your most powerful weapon. Sawyer didn't just save his ranch, he started the Canyon Lake Youth Boat Building Program. 8 kids every Saturday, building something real with their hands. The first boat they named the Recall. That tells you everything. If you have an HOA try to abuse power over your property, drop your story in the comments. Hit subscribe if you are new here. And come back next week. A story about a man whose HOA president tried to condemn his barn. The barn had been in his family since 1947, and that man has a structural engineering degree from Georgia Tech. You don't want to miss that one.